And we're here with Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Evan, doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. Doing great. For the Bruins beat listeners, I was in Utah. I said this in the intro. I was in Utah last week, so that's why people get a break. They get a break from Bruins beat for a week, which maybe some were really sad, maybe some were pumped, but it's tough. The Bruins were good during that time I was gone. So it's like, I guess they could have used a good upbeat Bruins beat episode. We're always doing negative ones. So, maybe it's a good thing if it's a positive one.
Yes.
But at any rate, how have you been? We did poke the bear last week, but how have you been during this time away from me? How are you handling yourself?
I have survived, Evan. I missed you, but all things considered, seems like you had a splendid time out in Utah. The Bruins were winning. I didn't have to drive back and forth to the Garden every other day, so that was good. Everyone won. Now at least the Bruins are back, which at this point I'll take them back. Hopefully this kind of winning stretch they got on the road there translates back to home ice, because you like to see the Bruins get some momentum here down the stretch.
Everyone's winning. You'll take them home. You'll take them at home. They're out so long. So I guess they can come home. They can come home and succeed. They played Monday night again. This is recorded before the game against the Kings on Monday. I'm guessing it was a win. Guessing. Now that's going to come back to bite me immediately.
We'll see
if they lost, but I'm going to guess that they won. But terrific road trip. One of the better road trips they've had in recent seasons. They went everywhere. They ended in Columbus, which I think is funny. That they couldn't even come fully home.
How you want to cap
in Columbus.
Yeah, exactly.
Low key, I've always thought about this with Columbus. Low key, a lit environment. I've never been to Nationwide, but it looks like a passionate fan base. They're always loud. It looks like a pretty good place to watch a game, and except for the cannon.
As long as you brace yourself for the cannon, that's the last thing you want. You want it firing off and you fly, your popcorn flies 10 rows back. You don't want that, but it seems like a pretty fun environment for a market that maybe isn't traditional, but in terms of not just the fans there, but also a team that looked like maybe 2-3 years ago, you're like, all right, this team's going to be in the dumps for a while. You use Panarin, Bobrovsky, those guys. And all of a sudden you're not running it back, but you've got a good young core to build off of moving forward. So it's a good organization over there.
They're responsible for the Lightning's success. They knocked them out of the playoffs in 4 games, and they were the greatest team ever. And then they were the ones who went the 5 overtime game and lost in the bubble against Tampa. And then they went on to win 2 Stanley Cups since. So maybe we should be hating on Columbus a little bit more than we are. But I think the biggest development of that road trip for me, and we'll get to Swayman later because he was outstanding, and I think we'll get to him in a bit. But to me, the biggest thing was your priority at the trade deadline up front may have changed. It may have changed. It looks like it has changed in the sense that up until that road trip, it was they need a second line center. They could use a winger. What can you get for DeBrusk? See what you can get there, but they need a second line center. And the big thing to come out of this road trip for me was your third line worked. Charlie Coyle next to Craig Smith. That seems like they want to keep Smith next to Coyle. Smith started scoring a ton at the end. Again, that road trip was so good. You got hat tricks out of DeBrusk, Craig Smith, Eric Alla had 8 points. So your third line seems to be working. Hard to say long term, but it works for now. Your second line with Hall and Pastrnak is really connecting. Halla is working in between them. So it really comes down to the first line right wing spot. It feels like that's now kind of the move to make.
Yeah, no, especially if Jake DeBrusk is the guy that's going to be moving out, right? And we've talked about this before. I believe we discussed it on Poke the Bear that, you could keep Jake DeBrusk past the deadline if you don't really feel like you have an offer that's worth moving him for. But what happens if you get past March 21st and he's still here and he's upset or dragging his feet? Because again, this is a guy who thought he was probably going to get moved in November, December, and he's still hit past the deadline. And if he's ineffective in that spot down the stretch, which you would hope wouldn't be the case, you'd hope he, more or less just rolls with the punches, finishes strong, and really maximizes his value before a new contract drops this summer. But if he's not effective down the stretch, all of a sudden you got this huge vacancy there. So, I definitely think if they're intent on moving to DeBrusk and it's a certainty that he's going, then I think you can't just deal him for, let's say a package deal for, a guy, let's just say Hurdle. Like they move him with a first and some guys for Hurdle, and there's just a insert winger here there on that top line. Like you can't really have that. And again, it's not to say that the Bruins maybe have to go out and get a 30 goals scorer. They need to get Brock Besser or, Conor Garland or something like that. Like even if it's, I don't want to say like Marcus Johansson, because I think now with Seattle, his game's dropped a bit, but a guy like that, right? A guy who a few years ago was good for 15 goals, 35, 40 points. Put him with Bergeron and Martian. It's going to be a pretty good line. You don't have to worry too much about that. So if they are intent on moving DeBrusk, I think you do have to get some winger in that spot that shores up that area of the lineup, because as you said, sure, Craig Smith could slot up, but if I'm the Bruins and I'm Bruce Cassidy, I'm not touching that third line at all. Like don't even go near it. So I think it's all going to come down to, I think, whether or not they get a good offer for DeBrusk and they're intent on moving him, because that's kind of the first domino to fall. And if we get to March 21st and their teams are still lowballing the Bruins, they don't want to move him, then you can kind of shift gears a little bit. But if DeBrusk is definitely going, you need to find someone to slot into that spot, because you can't have all of a sudden a question mark there on a line that should be your go-to line going to the playoffs.
Yes, and that's sort of the thing. Again, it's got to be a go-to line, and even we mentioned this on Poke the Bear with DeBrusk. It was do the Bruins actually have to trade DeBrusk? And we both kind of were like, be smart to, because again, it comes down to, you want a guy there who you can rely on, and there have been a few names that have been thrown around again as right side wingers who might not cost a ton. I know Conor Garland would cost a little bit. Brock Besser, kind of the same thing. One name that gets tossed about is Phil Kessel out in Arizona. Everyone loves to go back to Phil the Thrill, but the reality is he's won before. You're putting him with Bergeron and Marchand. If you just want him to produce, the guy's pretty damn consistent, and he's not going to cost you that much. So Kessel, I'm not completely out on. I think a lot of people just kind of go, "Oh, Phil Kessel." I don't think Kessel's as bad as people say he is, but there's a better name. And Fluto actually mentioned this in the Athletic on Monday morning. Oliver Bjorkstrand in Columbus. If they decide to sell, that'd be a pretty good ad. Again, I believe he's under contract for the next 4 seasons after this one, with $27 million over the course of that time. So around a little over 5.5 per, or a little over 5 per, which isn't cheap. But again, he's consistently producing. He has 19 goals, 20 assists this season. Consistent producer. If you can go out and get a guy like Bjorkstrand, again, he's not cheap. So you're not giving. He doesn't have this great contract that you're gonna have to give up, more prospects and assets for. That could be a doable thing if Columbus decides to sell.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are the kind of guys you're looking for, is guys either under term or, a guy like Bjorkstrand, a guy like Garland, someone who you can slot up to that top line and not have to worry about it I guess you have to worry about it if Patrice Bergeron retires, right? But let's say just if he comes back next year, if you go into the coming years, and it's all about, I think we've talked about it both on this podcast and Poke the Bear, I don't think the Bruins, even if they don't really know what Bergeron's doing, they're not looking to, all right, Bergeron's retired, we got to have a fire sale, we're blowing it up. I think it's very much they're looking at trying to bridge that gap between kind of these two generations of, sooner or later it's going to be McAvoy's team and Pasternak's team. And it's all about kind of finding those guys that you can pencil in long term to support kind of that core you have in place. So whether it's a guy like Bjorkstrand, whether it's a guy like Garland, we can talk about, 2C, about how much of a priority that is. But that's why I think they're looking at, even though he's a rental, a guy like Hurdle, who you hope to acquire and sign long term, because that's your 2C or your 1C 2-3 years down the road. So if you're the Bruins, you don't have to fret about shoring up that right side where you got Pasternak and Bjorkstrand or Garland or what have you. It's pretty good. And when you add in the fact that you've got Lysell coming through the system in, who knows, maybe a year or two, I'd probably imagine they want to have him, learn the ropes in Providence for a good amount before he's a viable guy. Like, I think people should probably pump the brakes a little bit there. But if you're all set with a guy like Bjorkstrand and Garland, you're doing pretty well for yourself in terms of getting ready and bridging that gap for this next kind of core moving forward.
And Garland's a local dude, so it's another
It makes
local
plenty
guy
of sense,
added.
doesn't it?
Makes perfect sense. And Bjorkstrand, our Anders Bjork was here, so it's
There you
like
go. There's
two
connections, right?
win-wins. There's connections. You know what you're getting in those guys. But speaking of 2Cs, it came out actually Monday afternoon. Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts podcast was talking about Claude Giroux, good old Claude Giroux, and said, I don't know about Colorado in this one. I still think they're around, but I wonder if they're looking elsewhere. I think the Bruins probably kicked tires on this. I think the Rangers have kicked tires on this. Now, it's interesting because Giroux has no term after this year, and he could easily go back to Philly like right after this season. He could go back. You don't really know what he's going to end up doing. Still a very effective center, and again, if he's your 2C, that's very good. But I think it's going to take a haul to get Giroux. And I also think again, it's a half season thing. So again, I think if Bergeron was to retire, and at the end of this year, if we knew that, and then on top of that, you knew that you probably might have to rebuild after Bergeron, Giroux actually wouldn't be a terrible thing. You just go, you know what, we're throwing all our chips on the table for this final season and go for it. But again, they're not going to be rebuilding after this because you still have Marchand and Swayman and McAvoy and Pastrnak and all these guys. And you're kind of low down the middle. Giroux doesn't really bolster that depth long term down the middle. Feels like Giroux's probably not going to be the case, even though this is getting talked up a bit now.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough scenario to map out with Giroux because you look at it, it depends on what lens you're looking at it through, right? Are you looking at just the short term of this year, which Drew's a damn good player and would help them out tremendously. And you could even make the argument that his versatility would actually help you out quite a bit because let's say, obviously Giroux is probably more well known as a center, but he can also play on the wing as well. So if Eric Hall is still rolling through and that line is still producing and you put Giroux with Bergeron and Marchand, pretty good. And if it
Might
doesn't
work.
work out, and Hollis slows down, which I think is what, even though we're pretty encouraged with what he's put forth so far in that second line, if he does slow down, Giroux centering Hall and Pastrnak isn't that bad either, right? So I mean, your bases are kind of covered for this year if you get Giroux, who is still a fantastic talent and a guy that we motivated to win, and it falls in line with kind of this short-term window you have. It's just about whether or not you want to give up what's going to be a first and probably a top prospect. I don't know if like Lysell would be the guy, but still valuable capital and assets on your team for a guy that is maybe here just for this half season, right? Like a guy who could very well go back to Philly or go somewhere else. And he's not really a long-term building block, right? He's what, I think 35, 34, Giroux. So
34. Yeah, 34
yeah.
years old.
So, I mean, it's one of those ones where it definitely helps you out this year. It makes plenty of sense within the next couple of months. But when you compare it to why they're looking at guys with term like Bjorkstrand or Golland, or looking at a guy like Hurdle, who granted you have to sign, he's a rental technically, but the rationale if you're trading for a guy like Hurdle, it's you're signing him long term. Like that's the risk, is that it's very much a short term gain for a situation where I
Long-term
think the
pain.
Bruins, yeah, exactly, where the Bruins I think are really trying to stay focused on not maximizing, but extending this contention window and bridging that gap. I don't know if Giroux fits into it. So it's not going to be a situation where, let's say we get to March 21st and, Hurdle re-signs with San Jose, or you're not getting Chikrin, which I don't think you're getting anyway, because I still think the cost is going to be ridiculous
Insane.
for him, right? Like, I don't think you're getting those guys. I don't think JT Miller's moving. If the Bruins are like, well, I guess we have to take Claude Giroux, who's still like on, putting up a point per game, still a motivated veteran guy to this team, pretty good. Like that is a great move. It's just for the Bruins, it's getting that priority of, how you want to approach this. Cause I think ideally they want the best of both worlds, right? Where you get an impact guy that helps you out this year and you build for the future, but all depends on what the prices are and who's available, in the days leading up to March 21st.
Easier said than done, but it does feel like Giroux's a guy who, unless I'm forgetting anyone, is probably the biggest difference maker in this deadline, short term for this season. Like you're getting Giroux, there's no doubt about it. He comes in your lineup, and as you said, he fills a million holes and he produces immediately. I don't know if there's a guy who's more of a sure bet. I mean, Hurdle maybe, but again, Giroux's done it for so
Yeah.
long. He's been through so many battles that it feels like Giroux would be a guy who, again, that's why Colorado makes so much sense. Just put your chips to the table and see what happens with a guy like Giroux. Because again, I mean, he's just so stellar. Who's going to be starting that for the Bruins in the playoffs? That is the big question. And it felt like the other big development over this good road trip was Jeremy Swayman is starting to kind of assert his dominance. Bruce Cassidy was asked about it. So he's probably going to play a little bit more down the stretch than Omar. I think that's kind of the right move because, again, you got to stick to someone. You kind of have to commit to someone a little bit and get Swayman in the group playing every day because that's how it would most likely be in the playoffs. Do you think Swayman's kind of the guy for the postseason, at least right now?
Yeah, I think so. And you look at kind of this goaltending situation, and we talked about this back in the fall in terms of how
We
complicated
talked
and
this a
messy.
lot.
Yes, quite a bit. We talk, about just how complicated and messy this whole goaltending situation was going to be going into the year, and now you're at a spot where it seems like everything's working out. Not the way they envisioned it. They envisioned Tuukka Rask was going to be healthy, but in terms of putting themselves in the best spot, getting ready for the playoffs, you've got Jeremy Swayman, who's really turned a corner ever since Rask retired, and is looking like the same guy that stormed onto the scene last year. I mean, looks like a legit number one goalie, a guy who really doesn't get phased, even though he didn't maybe have his best game on Saturday against Columbus. Still battled through, still made a couple of like crazy grade A saves. He had that crazy stop on line A, like
Yeah.
4 seconds to go, which like if they won that game in regulation would have been like, oh my God. Like, and then of
I was
course I
about to
think
clip it, and then they
yeah,
scored, and I was like, "I'm not clipping
delete.
it, never
Yep.
mind."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But you look at that, like he fights through that, and it's one thing Cassidy's talked about all the time with Swayman is even if he has a game where he kind of falls back to earth, he doesn't really let it snowball. He kind of just rolls with the punches and battles back, which is impressive to see. So Bruins, you have to be ecstatic that Swayman's kind of rounding into his own and looking like a number one guy, but also you're having a situation where we'll see how a guy like Omar responds and battles through this because I think from the Bruins, a team that has always talked about internal competition, how that drives goalie tandems, and you've seen it with Rask and Hudobin and Rask and Halak and all these other guys. Like, if Olmark sees Swimming getting on a roll here and starts battling through and putting up stronger numbers, it benefits everyone. It'd be a great problem to have if both of them are playing at a high level. I still think probably Swayman has the inside track right now. I think you'd have to see their numbers, flip more or less in terms of their production to kind of switch that, number one status that Swayman has. But again, I think that's what the Bruins are envisioning here is you've got Swayman at a high level and Allmark is responding to it and hopefully elevating his game as he sees Swayman kind of maybe not running away is probably not the right term for it, but he's establishing himself in kind of short order to get that number one spot.
I mean, again, he was February Rookie of the Month, could have even been, goalie
Yeah.
of the month. But it's funny, Omar's gonna establish some, gonna try to cut back on some of that playing time. Maybe when they do the post game hug, he'll like pull out a thing of scissors and like clip the back of his pads. Your pads.
How
Oh,
did
I,
this
I
happen?
guess I gotta go in. I guess I gotta go in for a period or something like that. But it does feel like Swayman. We've talked about this off the air. Feels like Swayman's a guy who could get like super hot in the playoffs. Like one of those guys who could just go just sicko mode and just go bananas down the stretch. It feels like he's kind of a guy who has that like inherent trait in him, and he had it at Maine, that's for sure. He had it at Maine, and he had it at the NHL level for certain spurts of the regular season. I'm so curious. Again, I think the most interesting thing to watch when it comes to the postseason is how he does in a series. Because again, we saw him briefly against the Islanders, and I believe it was a game 5. We
Yeah.
saw him for like a period, I think in the third. Um, so again, I'm so interested to see how he holds up in a playoff series. Again, I'm also interested to see how Omar responds to this stuff. Like again, like Omar has not looked great over the past month, but he did have, I believe was it January that Omar was pretty good in. He went on a run at some point that he
It
was
was like a
very very good.
9-20. I think from December 1st through maybe right around when Rask retired. So it was like a month, maybe like 5 week stretch. I think he had like a 921 save percentage. So pretty good.
Yeah, like, pretty good. Again, like I do think both of them are streaky-ish, and if you can kind of hit the right spot with that, you're cooking. So interesting stuff, and I do think Swayman is starting to run away with it. Who's not running away with anything is the
Who's
Toronto
that?
Maple Leafs. The
Oh,
Toronto Maple Leafs. So the first time in a long time all season, the Atlantic Division is actually kind of tightening up. Right now, as we record this on Monday, the Bruins are 2 points behind Toronto, which again was not in the cards even a month ago. Now it very much is that the Bruins could overtake for that third spot in the Atlantic. Toronto Who could have seen this coming? It's pretty crazy. I've never seen a Toronto team do this before. So I, for one, am shocked that this is how it's going. It doesn't feel like they've learned from any of their mistakes in the past, has it?
No, and it's one of those ones where, again, you looked at how good like guys like Campbell were playing at the start of the year, but it's the same thing. I mean, look at Freddie Anderson right now, who would get to the playoffs and be completely out of gas because they rode him the entire year. And I'm sure he benefits from being in Carolina, where they've got a better defense and they, get the puck out quickly and they don't spend a whole lot of time in their own zone. But look at just how his game is translated getting out of Toronto. And now you've got a situation where it seems like Campbell's out of gas. I don't know if Peter Mrazek's the guy you want to trust. I don't think if I'm a Maple Leafs fan and the Bruins play Peter Mrazek in the playoffs, he's got a
Ooh.
bit of a track record too. Would not be great. So, I mean, yeah, it's I don't even know how you fix that team without moving one of their top guys, just because in terms of the cap restraint, in terms of how many avenues you really have to improve that overall roster, like you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place with that team. Because I mean, they're ridiculously talented. We all know that, but you're not gonna. It's not just even one thing where it's like they're still missing that like number one defenseman or what have you. It's like you can't stay afloat if your goaltending giving you like 8.85 save percentage over like a 3-4 week span. Now it's not a winning formula. I would say wouldn't say I'm a hockey expert here, Evan, but usually 8.85
No.
save percentage is not. It's not what you're looking for. I would say.
It's not what you want. It's not what you want. I also just think the defense in front of him is not great. Like Carolina's, I think part of you mentioned it, you hit on it. Like Freddie Anderson down in Carolina, the defense is much better. The team is much better. It's also built better. They're not super top heavy with contracts. Um, but even this, I mean, again, like Michael Bunting has been good. Andre Kasha has
Great.
been
Yeah.
great. So like you're getting contributions from lower in the lineup. It's just like again, like you're spending too much on Matthews, Marner, Tavares, Nylander. And then on D, again, Morgan Riley's cool. He's super offensive and all that stuff. But around him, I mean, Muzzin's been on the IR for a bit. Just, I mean, again,
And
like,
and and Riley's not a good defensive guy anyway, too. Like you're
no.
well aware of what you're getting with him, so he's not the guy you build your decor around.
Yeah, I mean, again, that would be, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think I'm right. That would be like if you built your defense around like Torrey Krug. And again, Krug might even be a little bit better defensively. And
Yeah,
again, like, I think Krug was also a much better defensive system here. Um, but again, a guy like Riley leading your D, not really, no. And again, I look at that team and the way they're built, and it just goes to show you that you actually do need to invest in defensemen. It is a thing you need to do, and that's why it wouldn't surprise me. I don't know their cap situation off the top of my head, but I believe Muzzin is still on IR. Correct? It
yeah.
feels
I
like he's
believe
going to be
they're
on
in
it for
LTIR range, so
Yes. So I would not be surprised to see them add another defenseman or just another average defenseman at the deadline who they're going to pipe up. All the media up there is going to say that, Mark Giordano is still, a top pairing left shot defenseman, or John Klingberg. Or who's the other
Lindholm,
defenseman?
Hampus
Lindholm. That was
Lindholm.
the one that we said they were going to get. And he was going to become, the savior up in Toronto. So wouldn't be surprised to see the Bruins pass them. That would probably put them in range to play Florida or Tampa in the first round,
Yeah,
which
pick your
doesn't really
poison.
doesn't really help. I don't think that really helps your playoff positioning at all. Um, but hey, the higher I get, the higher I get, maybe the better. Again, I said that my big prediction was they were going to upset Florida in the first round. I would not
Yes.
be surprised to see that happen. So if it gets you to play Florida, great. Like I just think if you play Tampa, you're done, and there's nothing you can really do. So I would whatever helps you get to play Florida, you find a way to do, because again, the track record on Tampa is just too big. And with Toronto playing you in the first round, like I don't think they want. I still don't think they want to play you in the first round, just given the track record. But, anyways, that is this week's Bruins beat. Connor, what before you go, what would you like to plug? What can people look forward to over at Boston Sports Journal?
Yeah, we'll have plenty of coverage leading up to the trade deadline. We had another story we dropped today exploring Brock Besser trade and why I thought there should be a buyer beware tag for a guy like him, even though he's seems like it make a lot of sense as a potential 30 goal guy. Look a little
Comes
bit
with the keeper
deeper.
seat.
Yeah, exactly. Look a little bit deeper into his stats. A little cause for concern there. So we'll do a couple more of those
Hmm.
breakdowns. I'm sure we'll probably explore Giroux as a possibility possibility later this week. So all that stuff will be over at bostonsportsjournal.com. So subscribe over at BSJ. Want to follow me on Twitter? You can do that at ConorRyan_93.
Go do all that for CLNS Media. I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins beat listeners. Have a great rest of your week.